Right, we're going to make a start now. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. This presentation will last for up to 2 hours. It may be slightly shorter, depending on how many questions we get. But it's all going to be about navigating the future of MOT, insights, improvements, and engagement. And the agenda for today is I'm going to give the introduction. My name is Julian Jack, and I'm the membership manager here at the IMI. Next, we'll have an overview of the consultation and a vision for MOT by Neil Barlow, who's the head of policy for the DVSA. Next, we'll have from 12:25 to 12:45, changes to the MOT test, planned and potential, with Simon Smith, who's the product manager for the MOT testing service. From 12:45 to 1 p.m, we'll have the role of the IMI and industry perspectives given by Hayley Pells, who's the policy and public affairs lead for the IMI. Next, from 1 to 1:30, we'll have a panel discussion, which is all about shaping the future of MOT together. And then lastly, we'll have from 1:30 to 1:55 to 2, we'll have an extended question and answer session with the audience, with yourselves, with an opportunity to share feedback and suggestions. And then we'll finally close. So please do use the chat section if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask. And we'll get to those either at the end or during the sessions, depending on what the question is. Please do that, and hope you enjoy the session. So as I said, my name is Julian Jack. I've been at the IMI for 3 years. I'm the membership and services manager, and I'm here to host today. So let me just talk to you a little bit about the IMI before we begin. So the IMI, how the IMI champions your industry. So first of all, we maintain standards. The IMI develops skills, benchmarks, and qualifications that are relevant to the modern automotive sector, delivered through approved IMI centres. We assess and accredit the competence of individuals to operate in the sector across technical, customer-facing, and management roles. We develop people and careers. As an approved endpoint assessment organisation, the IMI provides robust career pathways for ambitious automotive professionals. We run an international membership community of automotive professionals. Whatever your background or status, you're welcome to become a fully fledged IMI member. And lastly, we campaign and build public confidence in the sector. So the IMI aims to effect positive change in issues such as electrification, career opportunities for young people. And if you are not a member currently, we wish you were here. As of this morning, we have 105,663 members. And if you're a member of the IMI already, thank you so much. We couldn't do what we do without you. If you're not a member, we'd love you to join and be part of our group. I would now like to pass you both on to Neil Barlow, the head of policy for the DVSA, who's going to give an overview of the consultation and vision for MOT. Over to you, Neil.
Hi there, and and thanks to the IMI for giving us opportunity to speak here. Actually, it's good to talk to a different audience. I guess we try and engage with the trade in lots of different ways, but actually talking directly to an audience that's predominantly testers is really good and really timely. So thank you for that. Can we just go on to my first slide, and that will hopefully remind me what I was going to say. Okay, lovely. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is I'll talk a little bit about the background to the consultation, the call for evidence, what the difference between those two things is, and then I'll try and give a little bit of a context, hopefully, to the rest of this session in some of the things we need to think about as we look ahead. And hopefully, that will provoke some questions, provoke some thinking about the future of the MOT, because that's where we want to be today. I think it's not as much about thinking about today's challenges, although that, I guess, gives the kind of foundation for thinking about the future. What we want to do is particularly think about, what should the future look like? What should an MOT be like in 2, 3, 4 years' time? How should we operate in that type of timeline? So, as a bit of background, and I'll probably forget some of the precise dates, it doesn't particularly matter, I guess. The department ran 2 things, and they were run concurrently. They were a consultation and a call for evidence. Just to explain what those things mean. So a consultation is done typically when government's kind of thinking of doing a thing. It's got in mind what it might do, but it wants to know views on that. So that was the part that was about first date of MOT and was also about PN testing. That was in what was called the consultation. So there was a reasonably clear view on what might want to be done. By the way, we have flicked off slideshow now, by the way, Julian, but it doesn't matter to me, but it might confuse some people in the audience. So yes, so that was the consultation part of it, was that around when the MOT should be, the MOT frequency, I suppose, and the PN testing. Now, the other part was what's called a call for evidence, and I think actually that will be most of our focus today. Now, a call for evidence is perhaps it's an earlier stage of government developing policy. And I know this might all seem really boring, but it's kind of worth understanding in the context. And a call for evidence is just done when the government wants to know about stuff. It's asking the world out there about a particular thing. And so that was done in a very broad way about MOT. So within the call for evidence were a load of questions about MOT content. There were questions about how we run the MOT, whether we could do that better, differently. There were questions from let's say from a motorist perspective. There were questions particularly getting into the stuff that garage businesses and the people who work in garages will worry about. And typically that call for evidence, that gives government information and allows government to then, off the back of that information, make firmer proposals that typically will then actually be consulted on a little bit further down the line. So in terms of what's happened so far, so the consultation and call for evidence happened in parallel. The government has now published its response to the consultation. And I'm sure as people on here know, that covered off or closed down the points around MOT frequency, first date of MOT, and it also said what was going to happen next on PN, which I suppose was perhaps slightly on the PN point. So PN testing, so this is let's call it a better way of testing emissions on modern diesel engines. It kind of recognised that actually we might have been expecting that this was something that we would either positively decide to implement or not implement, but actually we've decided for now that there's some more work we need to do before we can implement. Now, actually, I'll just talk about that a little bit more, actually, before I perhaps go back a step, because it probably illustrates some of the things that we need to do today in how we think about the future of MOT. Because you take the example of PN testing, and Simon will talk a little bit more about the detail, but actually you've got to balance quite a few things. So if we wanted to implement PN testing, it would mean lots of garage businesses would need to invest in new equipment. So that's an impact on those as businesses. It would potentially mean that the MOT test would become a little bit longer. May or may not, but it potentially would mean that. And of course, what it would mean from a motorist perspective is vehicles that today might pass an MOT, some of those wouldn't pass an MOT, and those motorists would have to spend what could be £600, £700, £800 in getting something fixed on a vehicle that might not otherwise have been fixed. And the only reason I take that as an example is that's kind of symptomatic of the considerations we need to consider on kind of anything we're thinking about changing. It's not just one dimension. It's not just these cars have got something wrong with them, we therefore should do it. It's, yes, we know that it would be great if the diesel particulate filter worked properly, emissions were as they should have been when the car was designed. However, we've got to think about the cost to society, the cost to businesses, the cost to the motoring general public. And I guess those are part of the reasons why we've said, actually, we need to do a little bit more work on this to understand it before we firmly decide what we want to do with PN testing. Okay, the other thing I thought would be helpful to do, without dwelling too much on the past, is perhaps just give a little bit of context as to why the government decided it wanted to consult and do a call for evidence. And I think, from an industry perspective, I should think most people here are quite pleased with the outcome of the consultation and think it was the right answer. I would imagine, because it's something that very much affects garage businesses and something that people in the industry are passionate about. And actually, just whilst on that subject, it's something the IMI as an organisation, I think, did a fantastic job of representing the people who work in the industry. They did a fantastic job of helping government come to a conclusion, and a conclusion that could have been different if the IMI hadn't provided the analysis, the insight that they were able to do on behalf of their members. So I think it was really good that we I guess kind of galvanized that kind of support from the IMI and also from some of the trade bodies that represent garage businesses. Going back to what I was going to say on why the consultation happened, and I guess there's a perception in society, and some of that's right, some of it's wrong, I suppose. It's just a perception that vehicles are changing, vehicles are becoming very sophisticated, and there's perhaps a perception that modern vehicles, and I've got a picture of a Tesla there as a deliberate example, vehicles like Teslas, this isn't my words, by the way, this is a kind of paraphrasing of opinion, of perhaps popular opinion. Cars like Teslas are amazing. They will tell you when anything is wrong with them, and therefore we don't need MOTs. MOTs are a thing of the past. MOTs are things that are done under the arches, garages, and don't reflect modern technology. I guess from my perspective, there's probably a bit of right and wrong in that. I think to some extent we might have missed a trick with some modernization opportunities in content of the MOT. However, there is also a public perception of cars like Teslas that isn't always correct. So I think there is a perception that those cars are amazing. They don't need the basic mechanical checks that we value so much in the MOT, and that isn't necessarily correct. So, that's some of the reasons as to why the challenge happened on MOT. I've also flagged there, cost of living. MOT is a thing that costs motorists money. Now, I think we would all contend it costs money of people for a good reason. If their car is of a condition where it wouldn't pass an MOT, then it needs money spending on it to make it better. But I guess, understanding the cost that the MOT does put on motorists, whether that is a necessary cost, particularly for all those cars that pass the MOT, particularly for younger cars that do pass the MOT more. And then the little wobbly graph that you probably won't be able to read, and it doesn't particularly matter what the detail says, but is maybe just observing that, our roads are quite safe. It's not to say we shouldn't strive for being better, but actually, particularly you compare us to other countries, our roads are safe. They are roads that become safer actually year on year. So I guess kind of looking at all of those things in the round, is the MOT fit for the vehicles that are on the road at the moment? Is it putting too much of a burden on people? Do we need it, given the great safety record we have in this country? Those are why government decided to ask the questions it did in that consultation and in the call for evidence. I'm sure we'll all have views about whether they should have done, whether they shouldn't have done. To some extent, it doesn't matter because it's happened, it's done. What I would encourage people to do is think positively looking forward, which is what today's about. So I think we've got through the consultation part, we've got through the part about frequency, about first MOT date. We've now got the opportunity to take all of those questions that were asked in that call for evidence, which went right across the MOT, and do something great with it to make our MOT better, to make our MOT do the best job it possibly can to provide value to the public, to the motoring public, to those people who benefit directly through the cars they drive, but also society in general, because nobody wants dangerous cars to be on the road. Nobody wants the risk that presents to all of us. So that to me is the opportunity we've got going forward, whether it's stuff about the detail of the test itself, whether it's stuff to do with how DVSA does its job in guiding and helping MOT garages, whether it's stuff to do with what we do with motorists and making sure they get MOTs when they should get them. So that hopefully gives a good context to some of the detail we might talk about. I think probably I'd just, I've got some more slides. So I was about to pass over to Simon, and then I remembered that I'm going to talk about something. Actually, if we can skip on to the next slide as well, actually, I can probably skip past that one. There we are. So actually, I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, and this perhaps gives a good handover to Simon that I'd inadvertently forgotten I'd written this slide, but this probably kind of summarizes a point I made earlier about us needing to be balanced how we think about any change. There's lots of reasons why we want the MOT to be better in the broadest sense, and this slide kind of tries to summarize those into 8 bullet points. I'm sure you could cut it different ways as you wish, but I think this is kind of my attempt to say, well, why do we want the MOT to be better? Well, we want it to be better because we want to get the most out of it for road safety and air quality. We want to make sure it remains value for money for motorists. I don't think we, and that's maybe a kind of counter to some of the other things. I don't think we ever want the MOT to become a thing that just for the test itself in today's money costs 200 quid rather than 40, 50 quid. I don't think that's what society wants. But what we do want is an MOT that stays a step ahead of vehicle technology changes. We don't want the MOT to fall behind. We don't want vehicles to have features on them that are necessary for the safe use of that vehicle, yet we don't have surety that those things operate, particularly if they're things that have a tendency to fail. We want to improve MOT compliance, so we want people to get MOTs on time. I do think that's something that perhaps we've had our eye less on than we might have done, but again, perhaps just a view, but it would be interesting to get others. The fifth one, and it's perhaps, looking at perhaps the negative side of what we sometimes see in how we operate the MOT. I think, we do know there's more MOT fraud than we would like. I guess any MOT fraud is stuff that we don't want. And there's stuff about MOT quality, about consistency, about making sure that we always apply, it shouldn't matter which garage I go to, I should get the same result wherever I go. And I know that some of the questions in advance were on that point of, the same must apply to DVSA. And actually, I completely agree. The same must apply to DVSA. We have to be and if we don't get that right, people need to call it out. That's absolutely what needs to happen. We want to improve user experience for motorists. Maybe quite a nebulous thing, but I do sometimes reflect that I suspect taking a car to a garage isn't something that people always relish. Not something that people who operate garages always naturally think about, actually. So maybe is something as an industry we need to think more about, how we can try and make the experience of going to a garage slightly less unpleasant than it might sometimes feel it is at the moment. Seventh point on that list is about removing obstacles to investment and modernisation. And I wasn't intended to talk about fees, but I guess behind that there is something about fees. I think one way or another we need to find a path through this that if we do need garages to invest in buying new kit to test whatever it might be, we need to create a regime that encourages that and doesn't discourage it. And I think for a variety of reasons, it does sometimes feel like the kind of current way of operating with the way the fee is currently capped can lead to a bit of a drive to the bottom. What is the incentive to invest in a business and have the latest kit that does a great job of diagnosing problems when actually the guy down the road can do the same job for 10 quid when you're trying to do it for 50 quid. So probably something for us to think about how we best do that. And then the last point on there is about thinking a little bit wider perhaps than road safety. I think there is stuff we can do about vehicle crime, for example. There's a fantastic opportunity here that MOT garages and the testers within them look at vehicles on behalf of government once a year. Nobody else does that. So is there anything else we can do to get value out of that transaction? Because at that point you're doing that for that 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it is. you were doing that on behalf of government. So is there something else we can do to get value out of that transaction? And that helps, that helps all of us. That helps the future of the MOT. So this time I have remembered how many slides I've got, and that really is my handover to Simon's session. So hopefully that gives a bit of background to where we're coming from, or where I'm coming from with MOT. And Simon's session hopefully will talk a little bit about some of the examples of stuff we're doing to try and support those goals that I've talked about in that last slide. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the questions later.
If you move on, Julian.
Thank you, Neil. I'll move on now.
So everybody, I'm Simon Smith. I'm a product manager with DVSA. My life started as a car mechanic many years ago in the 80s. Moving on from that, in 1999, I joined the vehicle inspectorate, as it was at the time, testing heavy goods vehicles in the heavy goods vehicle test stations. Progressed through, and I joined the MOT policy in 2014, although it wasn't policy at the time. I joined to build the MOT testing service. Now we're working with our IT providers, who built the MOT testing service, which was launched in 2015. Following on from that, I then moved into the MOT policy side, predominantly looking after the testing standards, which we have in the manual, and any errors there and ways to move forward. A bit of research and development, and also I oversee the training of testers, both new and the content for the annual assessment, etc. So I was just going to give a brief overview of where we are, what we've been doing, things that's going on in the future. It's not just this isn't just a one-way track. It should be a two-way thing. We should be engaging with you and the trade, which is what we want back. It's not just a one-way thing for DVSA. This is how it's going to be in the rest of it. A lot of the future announcements that we're looking at do need engagement, and we want people to come forward and get involved with us to move forward on how we should do the test, things that could be introduced to the test, and how we would test them. So the first slide is about particulate number testing, what we've been doing. Neil mentioned before that about this, it was in the call for evidence and the consultation. So what we actually did last year, we got a number of manufacturers, there were 3 manufacturers with 9 machines that we put throughout the country, and asked various MOT test stations in various demographics of the country if they would run a trial for us for a short period, and we could obtain the results compared to smoke opacity testing and the particulate number testing. PN testing has been carried out in a number of countries in Europe. They've done lots of studies and have lots of data on the differences between smoke opacity and the health benefits, or what PN testing has to offer for failed DPFs and things like that. So we're on the trial July to August with 1,800 tests completed by the 9 test stations with a 5% failure rate. The vehicle park of these vehicles that are required to have a DPF are in the probably 8 million vehicles that are out there of the 35 million that we test a year. A result of 5% then gives us a figure of around 1.8 million vehicles which would fail the PN test if it was to be introduced. So it's not just a small number that we were finding, it's quite a large, even though be a relatively small percentage to the whole vehicle park that's currently out there. As Neil said, the results have been collated, and it's now gone to DFT for the analysis to do benefits and cost analysis, as the machines are quite expensive, varying from probably between £4,500 to £9,000, depending on which manufacturer you would get. We would hope that as time moves on and other countries take it up, be it not just us here in the UK, that then the cost of machines will gradually reduce and make it more beneficial for businesses to introduce this and us to introduce it as a department. We'll move on to the next one. Another thing we did a couple of years ago, we wanted to see if we could get better information from vehicles by testers taking photographs on a mobile device, tablet, or static cameras. We were hoping to do this to take a picture of the number plate. We would then use ANPR software to bring that vehicle back and register it for the MOT test. That was our initial objective. We get lots and lots of vehicles that have been done in that have been registered for test and tested, where test stations have used a job card, done something right, keyed a number wrong, records are created and vehicles are tested against, records are created against the wrong vehicles. Causes a big problem for us. We've got one person working full time on this, just doing test record corrections of the amount of errors that are created. So the cameras in garages, as it was called at the time, trial, went out there. People liked it. It did bring back results for registering a vehicle for test via ANPR. However, there was problems with it that didn't really seem to suit. The IT didn't really seem to cope with it correctly. It added additional time for processing of images by the system. So we walked away from that and had a rethink about it. We now want to go out and run a second trial, and it's not just about then using ANPR. Are there benefits for us where we can take a photo, the tester can take a photograph of the car, it's got something in the background or whatever to prove that it's on there. This again prevents or hopefully prevents fraudulent tests being carried out away from the garage. Are there benefits that we can use? So we're going out to do a future trial, looking at different ways in, can this image, if it's taken, be recorded and used for future proofing where the test was done as the test being carried out on the correct vehicle. Next one, Julian. I don't know how many testers we've got on here, but you're probably aware, and it's just something to reiterate to the testing people out there who are required to do the annual assessment. In 2022, we introduced DBS checks for all new testers. Everybody's doing testing on behalf of the Secretary of State and public-facing people. We wanted to ensure that people coming in to the testing scheme were the right people to be dealing with the general public and didn't have any convictions against them. From January 24 this year, we expanded that to existing testers wanting to add additional groups, testers returning from cessation, and testers that have been suspended. At the start, when we introduced them, the vehicle examiner used to make a new tester used to make an appointment with the vehicle examiner to carry out his demonstration test. The vehicle examiner would then pitch up at the testing station, and there was no DBS certificate available. It was a lot of wasted time. They had to go away, wait for the tester to get a DBS certificate, go back, and then physically view it at the site. So in January 2024 this year, we introduced a system where a DBS would need to be submitted prior to a demonstration test being forwarded to the area. That's done online via a Microsoft Forms, which then goes to our MOT hub. You can either post in a copy of a DBS check, or the quicker way to do it is to get the check code when you register. This then is to prevent any hold-ups of vehicle examiners going out, wasting time and not coming back. It's all processed prior, and we can validate people prior to sending it to the areas for demonstration test. One thing that I just wanted to point out here is that we're coming up to the 31st of March. It's always a mad rush, and people leave it till the last minute to do their annual assessment. And we suspend, last year it was around 1,400 testers were suspended for not completing their annual assessment. We then get screams and shouts jumping up and down because they've all left it to the last minute and failed, or they've gone over the clock. We have people on the 31st of March submitting or trying to pass their annual assessment at 5 to midnight before we hit the suspend button. It's absolute crazy. I can't believe that people do it, whether they want to play a game or not. Regardless of that, I'm just trying to reiterate that to come back in, should testers be suspended for the annual assessment, they will be required to submit a DBS certificate. This can be a lengthy process. It can take up to 10 days to get it from the Home Office or whatever provider people wish to obtain a DBS check, and then there's probably a week's turnaround before it's cleared and sent to the area to carry out a demonstration test. So there could be potential that people will not get back into testing for not completing their annual assessment on time for a period of 4 to 6 weeks, which may be longer. Next one, moving on to new technologies. Electric vehicles, as Neil said, with the Teslas, there's a lot of new things on cars out there, and should we be checking them? Yeah, the fundamentals of a vehicle are pretty much the same. We've all got brakes, steering, lights, suspension, etc. And it's barely only the power plant which has changed. from an ICE to electric or hybrid? Should we be testing these? So what we're now looking for is, and we want industry engagement, what things should we be testing at MOT? Should we have a separate test for electric vehicles? Should it stay in the regime as it is? If you just move on to the next slide, Julian.
There's a quick question, Simon, if you wouldn't mind. What is the DVSA view of unbiased MOT testing? So MOT only, no repairs, like most of Europe?
I don't think we have a particular view on that at the minute. It's sort of, if there's a repair centre there, it's opportunity for the customer, isn't it? It's a one-stop shop. That for me, that's more beneficial.
Yeah.
To the motoring public. It's a one-stop shop. You fail and you can get your car repaired at the time. You don't have to take it away and take it back.
I mean, yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with Simon. I think I kind of get it. I think if there's a trade-off, isn't there? And this might sound a little bit wrong, but I think the model we have has huge strength for the consumer. It has huge, we have 23,500 outlets here where you have a choice of where you can get your MOT. The majority of which will provide some sort of repair service. They don't all, but the majority will. There is an alternative to say, let's not do that. Let's create a network of garages that can only do MOT. And that has a huge trade-off in cost to the motorist. I personally am quite proud of our system. I think we do a great job of keeping quality pretty good. It's not to say we shouldn't do better. We shouldn't try to do better. I wouldn't shake the tree, much as I'm an advocate for shaking the tree. I personally wouldn't shake it that much. I think we'll move into something that does a good job of being a highly cost-effective way of keeping the roads safe. So we should try and do better on quality, but I wouldn't shake it that much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Neil. And thank you, Simon. There's a few more questions, but we'll get to them at the end of your piece, Simon. So
yeah, I think I've just looked at them. We can go through there. So things that we're looking at with that's what happened, Julian. Things we're looking at for electric vehicles. 2021, it was mandated that electric vehicles should make a noise below 20 miles an hour to indicate that there's a vehicle there for that people will get in, run over, and in car parks, etc. beforehand. Should we be testing this? It has got it's something we're looking at. I think it has got its own challenges in that, the noise has got to be 50 decibels, and we've probably all heard them driving past us. Once you get into a workshop environment, it's very difficult to hear without hanging your head out of the window. So is it something that's feasible for us to add? Should we be looking at onboard chargers that's under the bonnet of them, security, insulation of them, charging ports? Should we be checking the inhibitor switch? Again, it would be additional costs to have a socket that you're a plug in. Can the vehicle drive away? Is that inhibitor system working? The batteries, and also a thing for consumers, which is probably not a safety issue, but people want to know, should they go out and buy a second-hand battery, what's the health status of the battery? Should it be reported like you do when you go buy a washing machine, you go buy any electrical device, that when you buy it brand new, it tells you it's rated A, B, C, or D? Should we be checking things like that at MOT for a consumer to ensure that if they're purchasing a car that's just had its MOT, it appears fit for service? Next one, Julian. Moving on from the electric and to hybrids, something we're looking at, and this again is probably where we need a bit more industry involvement. Testing emissions on hybrid vehicles. Currently, we don't. Government say we still don't, but for me, it's still got an ICE engine. It's there and it's polluting. There's many Toyota Priuses out there, which were introduced in 2008. So that makes them 16 years old now, running on the ICE engine, and there's no check on the emissions of how much they're polluting, etc., along with other vehicles. Challenges we've got with this and the research that we've done with some manufacturers is the ability to get the ICE to run. Some manufacturers have informed us that it's only by their particular manufacturer's scan tool or software to plug in that will allow the ICE to run. Others say, yes, you can do. There's press this button, press that button. Pretty much it was the same as testing brakes on the early Range Rovers, that you press this, press that, and it will allow the ICE to run. So that's the challenge we've got. I'd love to get it in. We're all about clean air and emission testing. but here's the challenges we've got of getting the ice to run, what limits would be applied, and how we would do it. Next one, Julian. This is completely separate to new technologies, although it does encompass new technologies. That's for the uptake of electric vans, the same size as your normal 3.5 ton transit van. Manufacturers have gone out and built electric vans exactly on the same chassis floor pan and the same body, with the same size, capacity, load area to fulfill. Because of the extra additional weight with the batteries and the motors, etc., they've had to up the limit to give them the same payload, and they've now been approved as heavy goods vehicle with a gross vehicle weight of up to 4.25 ton. The Transit's got a 3.9 ton and a 4.25 ton out there, both which brings them currently into heavy goods vehicle testing and not into light vehicle MOT. Because of the same size van, and it's going to be the same sort of customer, hopefully, that goes out and purchases these vans, who would buy the normal ICE equivalent of the 3.5 ton Transit, they're now being penalised by having to bring that van, which is essentially the same, for its first test at 1 year old, and then go to an ATF, plating and testing regulations, speed limiter rules, driver's hours rules, driving licence rules, some of which have already been relaxed and derogations being given against for driving licences. But the view then is now, because it's the same vehicle, should we be bringing these 4.25 ton vans out of heavy goods vehicle testing and into Class 7 testing? Exactly the same as the ICE comparable van that's for sale out there. So this is where the stage we are. We've gone out to the Garage Equipment Association. We surveyed a lot of Class 7 test stations to see what equipment was out there. And equipment-wise, yes, we're confident that there is facilities out there of the existing Class 7 testing stations that would be able to accommodate and test these vehicles. Moving on from that, the next step now is the government and the department are creating a consultation, pretty much as what's gone out for the MOT that we've just had last year, to get views on should Class 7 come into, should 4.25 ton vans and below electric vans come into Class 7 testing. So I would hope people keep their eye out for that consultation and give their views on it, and so hopefully progress can be made. The next slide now is where we're looking at is EOBD and ADAS systems. The EOBD is sort of pretty much, for the basics of it, moving on from what we had with the cameras trial. Can we take a picture of it to identify the vehicle and bring back those vehicle details to prevent errors and fraud with registering vehicles for test and incorrect records being created? So we've got a trial going on and working with EOBD manufacturers who have already got bespoke software out there within Europe. Plugging into the EOBD, can we just retrieve VIN and mileage? This will enable then to connect to the MOT testing service. This is the vehicle I've got. There's no need to rekey or prevent any errors, and it registers the vehicle for test from that. We'll also hopefully be able to get mileage readings back. This again prevents any keying errors, and also the possibility of identifying there and then whether there's mileage errors lower or significantly higher than previous tests without the need for retro keying and people making errors. Aside from that and retrieving vehicle data, we're now looking at ADAS systems. Should we be checking ADAS systems? There's a lot of mixed opinion on this, that people say, yeah, it's an advanced assistance system and it's not a safety critical system that's on there. The driver is still in control. And should these systems go out of kilter, what effect does it have? So we've recently just been carrying out research, trialing vehicles of, if we make something out of kilter for lane keep assist, we move the camera, we make it so it's not calibrated anymore, what effects do those have on the vehicle? Is it a safety aspect? Should we be testing them? So again, this is where we'd like input from trade, you guys out there, people to get involved, knowledge of what goes on throughout the different vehicle parks and manufacturers and what we should be doing. Or should we just be testing the ADAS systems that have been mandated? For instance, emergency brake assist, which is now mandated on the later vehicles, it automatically applies for the brakes. Again, challenges with this is, how do we test these systems? Is it just a case of plugging in and seeing if there's any fault codes via OBD, or is there any physical test that we can carry out by placing things in front of the radar or not? The research that we've done with radars and ADAS and cameras, yeah, if you move it out of kilter, it will still function, although the car will not function in the same manner. So this is the trade-off between a physical test of how to test systems or just an electronics test by plugging in. In which case, does plugging in give us any benefit? There may be warning lights that appear or messages onto the dashboard. Should we be using those merely as a reason for failure? Should we be testing them at all? Or yeah, should it just go forward to everything or anything? This is a piece of research where we're going and looking forward. So views on ADAS and things like that, quite welcome. What people want to put in the Q&A or the chat for us to take away. Next one, there was questions previously about annual training. There's been a lot here of disparity between how vehicle examiners go out. Some want paper copies, some want digital copies. The current system is, yeah, you've got to do your 3 hours CPD every year on the subjects that we publish. How you do that is by whatever method you want, in a group, by yourself, reading manuals, whatever on the content that we publish that it should be done on, going to a training provider, sitting down in a classroom, or by a group session where a consultant may come in and give training to yourselves. The problem that we have then is that we've got various measures of the way that people are recording their CPD. It's on a piece of paper, it's on a training provider's digital format, whatever. When the vehicle examiner comes out, he comes to look at the training records. Tester can't find them. He tests at multiple sites. Blah, blah, blah. It causes hassle. So we're hopefully building, or we are going to build a system where all CPD that testers complete will be recorded against their profile within MTS. So it will be each individual tester's responsibility to ensure that CPD is put against their profile in MTS, which will then be viewable for DVSA, the testers and the sites to ensure that it's been completed. Next one. This is the last piece of R&D that we've looked at. Again, it's trying to improve test quality. People struggle with the manual, end up calling the call centre. People don't call the call centre. They struggle to find things in the manual. Is there a digital solution that can help us or help testers make the right decision and make the right information? If you go on to the next one, Julian. So we called it Copilot, which is pretty much the same as ChatGPT, which you've probably found out there at Copilot. There's lots of things out there. So the initial objective was can it be done for the tester to speak or type into a device or a computer, and Copilot or ChatGPT will bring back the correct answer, be it for a fail or advice on how to test a specific component, what's in the manual. Should go on to the next one, Julian. Hopefully it would improve, as I've said, improve the test, improve decisions made, and improve information available to testers. That's now been finished, and we're now going to take a way forward. Is it something that's viable for us to build and put out there for people to use? And I think that's pretty much where I am. There we go. I think there's lots of questions in there. I've not looked at them while I've been rabbiting on, but
I think this is a good spot to quickly review the questions, because a lot of them are relevant to your presentation, Simon, rather than leaving them all to the end. Julian, are there any common themes that you've pulled out?
Just going to it now, Hayley. Thank you for that. And actually, it was really great, Simon. You were able to kind of address a lot of the questions during your presentation. But let's just have a quick look. do we know what the implications for hybrid vehicles that no longer have the capacity of running on EV and only run on the ICE engines? Should we conduct like an emissions test for those?
Again, that just boils down back to the hybrid, whether it's running or not, on electric or not. I think we're all aware that people's may put me wrong, but the hybrids that I've got, it runs not a lot on electric. The majority of it is done on the ICE engine. Yeah, I think we should be testing emissions on all hybrids regardless. Though be it problematic of getting the ICE to operate, even if the battery is completely flat and it's just running on ICE all the time. I assume they've still got the ability when the vehicle's static in a test station to be able to get that ICE to run, which it still may not do because it's the electronics are as a hybrid and probably won't run the ICE just sat in it statically to do an emission test.
Excellent. Yeah, there's a few questions about the mild hybrids. For example, why aren't we testing mild hybrids on 48-volt system? These vehicles only run on ICE. So what is the problem getting the engine to run to test the emissions? So we're getting a few questions like that.
Yeah. For me, there is no problem, and it's a battle I have with government, and I've battled long and hard to get these in because, yes, I believe that they should be tested, though the department still says it's a hybrid and it's still got electric assistance, and therefore we're not testing emissions on. And it's something that we're still going to take forward and try and get this introduced.
So that's why sessions like these are really important, because actually people can share their feedback, and that can assist you, Simon, can't it? And as well as us in the consultations. Let's just have a look at this.
I think the question about the tyre tread depth gauge is an interesting one, because it looks like there is a misalignment of understanding of what the calibration procedure and frequency is for that piece of equipment. I must admit, when I was an MOT tester, it was an item of equipment that I had to put lots of things in place to make sure that I remembered to do this one.
Off the top of my head, it's not so. I generally look after that. I would have to look it up in the guide, so I wouldn't want to give it off the
question. I would always refer to the guide. Yeah, and if
it's in the guide.
Yeah, if it's in the guide, I used to treat the guide as Bible, and I'm quite happy to die on that hill, apart from when I want to make changes to the guide.
There was one point on the camera trials that you mentioned, Simon, and this was about, are you looking at using the camera trial to ensure license plate compliance? Because Frank noticed that the supplier's name and postcode and BS number and other markings are not inspected during the MOT, but this was down via photos automatically would increase the compliance without adding any burdens to testers?
No, it's not the main use of it was not to identify any misspellings or characters misrepresentation of number plates. It's merely there to prevent fraud, although I guess it's a possibility in the future should it be a picture be taken and stored that it could be used as evidence whether it was correct or wrong in the future, possibly for enforcement, the police, for example.
Well, yeah.
We all know that vehicles come with plates on that are incorrectly spaced or incorrect fonts and etc. It fails its test, it comes back with the right plates on, and then as soon as it's drove out of the test station, it's got the illegal plates on it again.
Excellent. And then the final one I'll ask before we go on to your section, Hayley, is you mentioned, Simon, in your presentation about CPD being recorded. So Alan was asking, will TQI be recorded as well as CPD?
Not at this stage. So the requirement is just to record CPD. It's the start of a journey.
Right.
So the system is going to be built. You record your CPD, and in the future, I expect it to grow of what we'll do with it, what data we get from it, what people are actually doing. So the initial is no, it's just to record CPD hours that you've done. It's going to be pretty much exactly the same as you got on the paper sheets now. What did you do? When did you do it? What have you learned? How did you learn? How long did you do it for? So you did half an hour on emissions. On the 1st of March, I did half an hour on emissions, filled the relevant boxes in. I read the manual. I learned that the emissions, blah, 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 blah. Brilliant. Record. That half an hour then go against your log, and the 3 hours will count down. I've got 2.5 hours to do this year. When you've done all your 3 hours and you've put multiple entries in, then it will be marked as complete. That you've
Thank
done
you,
your
Simon.
CPD year.
Really appreciate it.
There's one other question from Lee Summerhays that is a burning one for me. I'm going to read out the question from Lee. It is my understanding that tester training topics are recommended for the year and not compulsory. Providing 3 hours training is carried out, it should be on topics that are most beneficial to the tester. Is this correct? I think I can quite confidently say that you can do additional training on anything that you think is beneficial to you, but that core syllabus is mandatory.
The core syllabus is mandatory. It's hidden away. Unfortunately, it's been hidden. It's not hidden away, but it's difficult to find on gov.uk. We set the syllabus or the items from feedback we get back from our vehicle examiners, previous failures in previous annual assessments, and shortcomings which are identified within data that we get from the MOT testing service, where it's identified if people seem to be doing things not right, and there's a bit of education that needs to be done here. That's why we put in there. Moving forward from next year, we're hoping to make, or the gov.uk pages will be more prominent, where testers can go, as well as the training providers, to obtain the details of what items need to be.
I think we'd all celebrate some greater transparency in that area. And Jim also asks what are DVSA views about ongoing training logs for the AEDM, AP, VTS site manager. There's lots of individuals in management roles that affect and influence the training process and the culture of compliance. And it was highlighted in the AEDM consultation review and referred to in phase 2. Is there any update on that?
It is something that's been considered, although it's not been taken forward yet, with other aspects of the consultation on these other bits that seem to get in the way of and take precedence with electric vans and things like that. But it is being considered, and yeah, we do believe it is a good idea for mandatory training, possible annual assessments for management roles and admin roles within the scheme.
And just to add to that alphabet soup, I'd like to chuck in AEC as well in there.
And an AEC. Well,
Yeah.
I would think AECs.
We want all of them.
AECs, yeah. It's a different role, isn't it? The consultancy role is outside and doesn't have any. It's more of an advisory capability rather than a mandated function or a function that isn't there. But yeah, AECs. Training providers, we currently make trainers, and within the training providers do the annual assessment and CPD to ensure that they can deliver that and are kept up to date as well. So yeah.
And I did like Amy Jane's request for a potential API or similar for external training providers to upload CPD records on behalf of the testers. I think those who like an in-person training environment, if they had something similar to how the annual assessments are uploaded, if that could also be replicated with the training logs, that would be quite nice and efficient. I'd like that too.
It is efficient, but it's an area of contentions from me being sat on the other side of the fence. And that's no other industry do it or have the ability to do this. That it's an individual's training log, and it is for the individual to record what they have learned and not what somebody has taught them to learn.
Amy Jane does give an exemplar of the driver CPC model, but I think this is definitely something that we could have further discussion on.
Yeah, I think we can pick it up outside afterwards, but yeah.
Yeah.
There's two sides of the fence to this. My side is different to what the training side is.
Brilliant.
Yeah, we're open to discussion. Let's have a chat.
So we best crack on with my slides, and I'm going to get through them quite quickly to try and catch up our time, because I understand many of us are in the middle of our working day. So for those who don't know me, my name is Hayley Pells, and I am the Policy and Public Affairs Lead here at the Institute of the Motor Industry. Former spanner twirler, I'm now here talking about fixing cars rather than fixing them myself, which I've got to say is enormously good fun. So the Institute of the Motor Industry played a significant role in policy because we act as a bridge between the motor industry and government. As we now represent, as Julian mentioned earlier, over 105,000 members just in the UK, we can consolidate that information and take it to decision makers on your behalf. And I feel quite strongly that incorporating industry perspectives ensures that policies are grounded in real world insights. And I think the MOT consultation and call for evidence really did give us an opportunity to flex that voice that we have within industry. By providing expert insights, data analysis, and recommendations on top of this industry interaction, we can help inform policy decisions regarding the needs of the automotive workforce. So this involvement ensures that the industry's perspective is considered in policy making. And I can't labour this enough. These decisions impact you, and our government works for us. Our government is there to create policy that enables us to work and live in a safe environment where we can thrive. So policy shouldn't be there to provide some kind of regulatory burden. It should be fit for purpose, and it should be there existing so we can get on with the things that we're good at, and then we can all live in this sort of utopia, which would be quite nice. Garage Industry Trends, who I worked with closely on the MOT consultation, lent the impressive data crunch of 40.3 million lines of test data from 2021. This made our computers really rather hot, and we had to buy additional memory and all kinds of things. Thankfully, Alex and I are PC geeks, so we had the hardware at home to complete this task. But it allowed us to understand the failure rates and to split them and compare them by powertrain. So we sense checked this in-house. It's nothing short of a brag, really, but we've got one of the best research minds for automotive data and insights in Emma Carrigy, who's been with us for nearly 10 years and is absolutely hot stuff on this kind of data. So she robustly checked these processes, and then we had them externally verified. A couple of the departments that we went to for that external verification, not limited to, but did include the Transport Research Laboratory, and we also took it to DFT and DVSA to show them what we found. We then followed that up with discussion on the qualitative research. We included consumer surveys going straight to motorists, as well as people operating businesses within the sector. And we discussed with other sector stakeholders, such as the insurance companies, and this complements the quantitative data analysis. So moving forward, we will always seek your view, and we're really lucky that we have lots of very active members who robustly support this work. We also use respected sources of external data to make sure that the advice that we give is grounded in facts. So this includes things like the Office of National Statistics. We use a lot of government data when presenting our interpretation and analysis of what government is up to. And then we use that in addition to the feedback that we get from industry. So your views, moving on to the next slide. It's your institute, it is your voice. And we're here as a not-for-profit organisation to represent that voice. And I'm very excited that we're now moving into the call for evidence phase, and we can start consolidating all of this rich experience. We have a fantastic complement of MOT testers within the UK who have real valuable things to say on how the test can be improved. And as we move forward and government wants to make these decisions that will benefit a more holistic approach, for motorists and everybody else who uses our road system. I think the view of our industry is going to be critical in making sure that it's fit for purpose for the future. So do look out for our communications, and I'm now excited to get us into the panel discussion.
Fantastic. And please keep those questions coming, everyone. Thank you so much, Hayley, for that presentation. So now it's a panel discussion on shaping the future of MOT together. So following the successful outcome of the MOT consultation, how can we engage more with the MOT community on the desired improvements and innovations in MOT practices? Who would like to start us off with that?
Well, if there's going to be a bun fight where we all leap in first, I think it depends on the individual, the MOT tester, and firstly, how they want to engage. Some people like to get an email off. Some people like to have a face-to-face conversation. Other people enjoy the flexibility of an online discussion like this. And I think the first thing we're going to have to do is learn how people want to talk to us, is my opinion.
Yeah, I agree, and I think, you know, engagement's kind of one of those easy things to talk about, isn't it? And but harder to do. You know, we've got a lot of people in the industry, and there'll be a lot of different views. You can see it in the chat. There's lots of different views. I think the key thing we all need to do actually is understand there will always be different perspectives on a thing, whether it's about the detail of technical standards, what we should charge in terms of fees, or any other aspect of MOT. I think key thing as an industry is we need to be open to hearing those views, and this kind of forum I think is a great way of doing it. There will be other ways that the IMI and other bodies can engage with people, and there's other ways DVSA can directly engage with people. We just need to be open to all of those different ways, and in the end we find a way forward, and then need to go with that way forward. Whether we, you know, we won't all agree with it in the end, but we'll need to find a way forward.
I think also there is the formal opportunity that comes up with things like calls for evidence. And correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there thousands of responses to the call for evidence when it was initially opened?
Maybe that's the one for me to answer. Yeah, there was about 4,500 responses.
Sorry,
that
Matthew,
we had.
could I just ask you to introduce yourself to the group?
Yes, yeah, no problem. So for those who haven't met me, I'm Matthew Packett, a Senior Policy Advisor at the Department for Transport. So we work very closely with Neil and Simon on all of this work, and we essentially drafted the consultation and the call for evidence together, and we'll be working together on what the next steps are moving forward. But yeah, we had about 4,500 responses, so it was a very popular topic, and goes back to the point Neil was saying, that there's a lot of different people involved with the MOT, and I think one of the things we've kind of learned or had reinforced from those responses is that there's still quite a bit of work to get people better connected and to get type approval to fit in better with the system, to ensure that there's better communication between manufacturers and ourselves, and between manufacturers and garages, and making sure that as we move forward, all those different elements work together rather than causing tension with each other.
Thank you, Matthew. And I think that someone on the audience, Ian, has said engagement, as we just mentioned, listening to the shop floor, regular meetings with Zoom or face-to-face like this, feedback from the DVSA, and that's the way to really get the best out of everyone's kind of communication. Simon, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Seemingly not. He's on mute. I mean, I was just typing actually back to Ian's comment. I think I'll stop typing and just say it. I get a bit into the typing, and you probably noticed I've been furiously answering quite a lot of them. And
Thank you.
I think DVSA, you know, and it's kind of inevitable perhaps with an enforcement organisation, but we find things wrong. It's kind of what enforcement organisations do, and it is part of what we are there to do. We are there to, you know, find those garages that are committing fraud. We are there to find those garages that aren't doing the things they should be doing. However, that can lead to a perception, or in some cases a reality, of perhaps being a bit picky and finding the wrong and being determined to find the wrong. So I think, you know, in terms of our approach, in terms of our outlook, we need to kind of reflect on that, and we do need to be seeing the good as well as seeing the bad. And I think, you know, personally, I'm a big advocate of that. We have now restructured slightly internally. So we've gone from having what was 400 or 500 vehicle examiners who did bits of commercial vehicle enforcement, bits of MOT enforcement. We focused down to say, actually, let's turn this into a smaller team of people who are dedicated to MOT work, which has a few advantages. It hopefully helps with some of the inconsistencies we sometimes have. And there's no point pretending we don't. But it also helps in terms of getting that focus and that kind of focus in how we want to be perceived and how we want our outlook to be. So, and that isn't to say that there's suddenly be a wholesale change and we'll suddenly start hugging everybody in garages, but I think it's, we need to be seen to be recognizing the good as well as finding the bad.
Definitely.
Let's hope we don't start hugging everyone in garages. Nobody wants that, do they?
Excellent. Simon, did you want to mention anything? You unmuted yourself. I just wanted to just double check.
No, I'm fine. Sorry, I was yapping away to myself there before, wasn't I?
That's okay.
I thought that before this started. I thought somebody's going to do it, but yeah, now was the first, and I probably won't be the last. Well, hopefully not. Well, I have nothing else to add there. Sorry.
Okay. And I think everyone has mentioned it in the talk so far regarding the kind of MOT framework and the changes. What can we summarize what the impact of the EVs and the new technologies will be on testing standards?
Well, I think the testing standards is going to be the same. We're not going to change. We're not going to change tyre limits to make them any different for this or wearing components. The wearing standard same as every other vehicle wearing components. It's a failure when it's met the point of needing to be repaired or replaced.
I think there's always going to be still an element of everything needs to stop and stick to the road.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bare minimum requirement. Has that component reached a point where it needs to be replaced or repaired?
Excellent, and that fits the motto of helping you stay safe and on Britain's roads. Really, that's what we're trying to do, isn't it? With everything that we're doing, with the framework, with the tests, with everything that we're doing. So,
there was a question that came up from John Parham, Julian.
yes,
As DVSA sit as judge, jury, and executioner in disciplinary matters, are lessons being learned in the light of the post office scandal and the impending changes to prosecution by the BBC? Loss of livelihood is not a matter to be taken lightly with little or no independent oversight.
I think the Horizon scandal is something completely different to what we are now. That was, yeah, IT is IT, and it still has bugs in it. When developers build a bit of software that gives some functionality, there may well be some bugs in it from time to time, and addressed accordingly. The Horizon scandal, for me, is something different, and it happened a long time ago. Yes, things probably different here, but I don't expect people to be using, there's a bug in your system, it's now down to Horizon and everything else. For me, it's a separate issue, and that's something that happened at the time and shouldn't be comparable to every single IT system out there. If people go to the bank and somebody pulls some money out of their bank or there's something wrong with the bank, are they going to blame Horizon? It's an IT system that's being built.
Yeah, and I think all I'd say, adding to that, is, again, and I suppose, I'm no expert on the post office's IT systems. It's not my job, but my understanding was in those cases, the evidence from the IT system, i.e. the IT system has said you've sold X, the money isn't in the till, therefore you were stealing. And it was a very simple piece of evidence, effectively, that used the IT system as the primary evidence. Generally, and I'm not saying on every occasion, but generally, where DVSA is prosecuting, it's normally based on direct evidence that you said you tested vehicle ABC123, you did not. That vehicle was not in the garage. That vehicle was elsewhere. So I think where we do prosecute, and actually prosecution is still, there is independent redress, there is the court system, it is independent of DVSA. But where we do prosecute, it is in those extreme cases, but generally the IT is not the primary evidence. So I completely get that loss of livelihood is important. And I think actually some may argue, we are too cautious sometimes in the action we take against garages that are choosing not to follow the rules and do things they shouldn't do. I think there's a big difference between people making a mistake in EIT and recording something they shouldn't record versus fraud, which is where we should be prosecuting.
Yeah.
Sound like Mr. Grumpy then. I'm not really trying to be Mr. Grumpy. I suppose I probably have seen a few occasions recently of where
Yeah.
Horizon has been used as an excuse for things, and it's a bit disappointing. Something's been on telly. That shouldn't be an excuse for something. It feels like it might be used as a way of wheedling out of something that should be happening.
Excellent. And is there any other feedback that anyone has on how we can guide future directions? Is there any kind of audience participation or anything for anyone from the panel? Sorry.
I mean, I think there's lots of, from my perspective, and I think there's lots of detail points in there, and it's kind of hard sometimes to try and bring together the kind of detail points. But I think, I think my perspective is the MOT does need to change to reflect changing vehicle technology, I think, but it doesn't need to lose sight of those basics that Hayley talked about. We need to keep the basics in mind. We need to not get distracted by worrying about, let's say, should we or shouldn't we test blind spot indicators? In truth, I don't have a deeply strong view on it, but what we don't want to do is end up with something that's deeply complicated for checking blind spot indicators and lose sight of the fact that the key thing we need to know about is whether the brakes work, whether the steering works, and whatever else might be important. He says it with his mind going blank. There is balance in all of this, and yes, there will be things as technology, and there's a few suggestions in the chat of can we be checking the vehicle's own diagnostic systems to say that the ADAS is working. And that's probably exactly the kind of thought process I go through, actually. If vehicles are well designed, they will diagnose themselves, as is required for ABS, maybe less well mandated for ADAS at the moment, but maybe that's something we can get to. So I think that's the sort of thought process we need of, yes, if we want to test those systems, are there ways we can do that in a simple way that doesn't start making the MOT cost many hundreds of pounds rather than 50-ish pounds.
Excellent.
But I mean, what I wouldn't do, and I know I have been answering quite a lot of comments in the chat where I'm not agreeing with people. That isn't me saying I'm not agreeing and that's never going to happen. It's generally providing a different perspective. I think we need to be open to all sorts of change, be it changes in details of test content and how we go about things, but also changes in things like fee structures, etc., which I've answered a few on. I haven't answered all of them on my view, but there's probably a few that say similar things. But all of that it's a system, isn't it? And we can't think about content without talking about investment. We can't think about investment without thinking about how we pay for investment. So we need to consider all things in the round.
Great.
If there isn't another question that's burning, or do you have a burning question, Julian?
No. Although I've seen a cheeky question from Tom asking, should all MOT testers have an appropriate EV qualification? If not now, then potentially in the future.
And good textbooks are available from all good bookstores. Hi, Tom. Good to see you. This is, I think, a really interesting question. Who wants to answer it first?
Well, I can go from my perspective that, yeah, we should be working with industry on EVs. However, it retains my personal view that it is a visible inspection as the MOT, and it's a level 2 and doesn't go nowhere near the realms of level 3 or level 4 of requiring PPE, etc. So yes, for me, it's awareness that should be probably awareness courses or whatever for businesses to do, but not for DVSA to implement as a requirement for a qualification to carry out an EV qualification to carry out MOT tests. I think the guidance that we give there, and people are pretty much if there's a big orange cable, you don't touch it.
I think awareness as well is also going to be filtering into CPD for annual assessment. And I'm trying to think of instances when I was a tester myself, when I tested vehicles I had no formal training on. So I completed my light vehicle technician apprenticeship, and because I'm so very old, I was a nominated tester rather than a tester, showing my age there. I never had any specific training on LPG. So when that first came in for MOT test, when that was a thing, there was no expectation that I would do any additional training for that, but I did do because I didn't want to hurt myself. So I quite celebrate the annual testing, although I grumble about it and complain when doing it. There are aspects that I found really useful. To pull out an example of one that I found really useful, I have an obsession with quads and the distinction between L6, L7 and M1 vehicles. It's a kind of a geeky thing. I know I should get a hobby that is a bit more interesting. But I found the CPD around the Yamaha Raptor, when was that? 3 years ago, I think, 2, 3 years ago. And how that was categorized owing to its power output as an M1 vehicle. Things like that, where vehicles are changing quite rapidly, because I would look at a Yamaha Raptor and call it a quad. I could have unknowingly walked into a situation where I would have incorrectly applied a classification to a new vehicle and got myself into quite some hot water. And where I live in South Wales, quads are quite popular. I don't know if people can't get their motorbike licenses or something. I'm not really into the Yamaha Raptor.
Balance on the hills, I think, Hayley.
Yeah, yeah, something like that, isn't it? Yeah, so you don't fall off. But I can't talk. I also drive a Citroen Ami, which is a quad but looks like a car. So I think all of those things that are coming out, I think, are really useful to keep on top of. And so I think if we necessitated a qualification for everything that is coming out for something that is ultimately a visual inspection, is that a bit onerous when we've also got the CPD and annual assessment? And again, I'm not saying that this is the way it should be, like Neil. I'm very open to this discussion. Maybe some things should have a qualification. Perhaps we all should have been doing LPG training when that first became a thing. But it seemed to sort of pass and then go, didn't it? Has anybody seen an LPG presentation recently? Are they still a thing? Can you still buy it? I don't know.
I guess the thing sorry, go on.
No, I was going to start going on about smaller vehicle solutions as we're going into a cost of living crisis. Are we going to, if we see battery regulation for micromobility solutions, are we going to be doing some kind of check on e-bikes and scooters? Will that fall into our lap, or will that fall somewhere else? The uptake for micromobility solutions that have lithium-ion technology, particularly in city centres. London, we haven't gone back to pre-pandemic levels of tube travel yet. The increased preference for e-bikes is now massive. Should we be making sure that e-bikes that can travel at, is it 15 mile an hour they're allowed to go up to?
I don't know.
No, I was walking down the road and
I think it's less than that.
Yeah, there was an e-bike, a cargo bike, that had been converted to carry 4 large barrels of ale to a pub, and it was proudly liveried up to say that this was green transport to get beer around London. But yeah, you've got a contact patch with the road of about a 50p piece and a set of brake pads that are smaller than my mobile phone. And that's a lot of weight that you're going to try and stop. And these vehicles are not tested at all. There's no regulation for the production of their batteries or inspection. I do wonder where that's going to land in the future. And are those our monkeys? Is this our circus?
Yeah, and all I was going to say actually, and again, it's a gut feel. It's not a statement of what government policy will be or is, but my gut feel actually is that very light end, be it e-scooters or electrically assisted pedal cycles, will stay out of MOT. I think those forms of transport kind of only work when they are, in truth, when they're really cheap and when they're, dare I say, semi-disposable. They're things that you don't mend particularly. So that's my gut feel at that end of the market. Now, again, as time goes on, I'm sure there will be more blurring of boundaries. Actually, I think that is one thing we have seen in recent years. Just going back a little to the point on EV training. Again, I suppose I'm quite open to suggestion. I think, I suppose I felt it doesn't feel like something that government needs to force exactly what's happening on training. However, what we don't want is through something we're doing, people ending up getting in a position where they end up hurting themselves because they're not quite sure what they're doing and they've put themselves at risk. So, are there situations where EVs are coming into garages? I suspect it's more at the repair end than at MOT, where people could end up putting themselves at risk. But I think we've all got an interest as an industry in avoiding that happening. So I don't think MOT is the only thing that will require people to know more about EVs than they might know now. But open to suggestions, really.
Yeah, that was exactly what my thoughts were, Neil. That you would think most of the dangerous situations that would be created through having an EV in a garage are going to be through the repair side, and so it might be that we need to support training as a department, or we need to support awareness as a department of how to safely do the repair side of this. But at the moment, at least, I don't think it feels like one where there's too much dangerous going on in terms of the visual inspection and what might be happening in the short term. And actually, hopefully, the sort of a lot of garages doing repairs at the same time as doing MOTs probably means they might end up with that knowledge and expertise and the safety equipment, whether that's like high voltage gloves and protective equipment like that they would need to do the repairs anyway.
I was an early adopter as an EV technician. I was really excited about it because I can't stand working on diesels. And the only thing I hate more than working on diesels is working on gearboxes. Nasty things. If I never have to take another gearbox out ever again, that would be fine with me. So I was really excited about the idea of working on EVs, and I think I was almost disappointed that they didn't seem to go wrong very often. Most of the presentations that I saw, and maybe I was just lucky or something, I'm not sure. But the high voltage system tended not to go wrong. It tended to be steering, stopping, sticking to the road. With the exemption of the Toyota Prius, which would routinely sort of take its high voltage battery pack offline because the cooling fan wouldn't engage to direct the airflow over the battery pack. And so it was my delightful job to take a load of car seats and a back seat out of a Toyota Prius and then fish all the McDonald's chips, hair bubbles and crayons out of the fan. If the cooling system for a high voltage battery pack is unable to come online, owing to that relationship with thermal runaway, would this be not something that could be considered a safety concern? I did look at it at the time and wonder, I couldn't find anything within the guide or the inspection manual that would aid me in cooling systems not engaging as they should.
I don't think we're getting vehicles with these sort of problems yet, either. It's going to, defects with vehicles are going to progress as they get older. You get a 3-year-old ICE engine, and the ICE engine's not likely to want any repair at that time, is it? Until it gets further and more mileage down the line, which I assume is going to become more prevalent with electric vehicles. That it's still yet an unknown of what. Yes, you see thermal runaway and cars are exploding and setting on fire and burning that, but until there's more information available, or we see things that require more looking at, because they're not failing at the minute, we don't know what the failures of these sort of things is going to be doing.
I think that sort of leads into the question from KCH about trying to find a mechanism to check internal battery health, as well as carefully checking cabling and so forth. I mean, some cabling, not much. I'm trying to think of a presentation where I could see cabling easily. Quite often by design, things are behind panels that don't really facilitate an inspection that easily. I mean, I was always quite a fan of, if I could get a little lever in there so I could have a look at brake lines and things, definitely would. But not really sure of many presentations off the top of my head where you can get to that cabling easily. KCH, I'm not quite sure what else to address you as. But yeah, I think being able to check internal battery health would be something that could be worth a discussion. And maybe that feeds into Tom's point then about having appropriate qualification. One of the other areas that I'm sort of abusing my position of having older the microphone now, is, are we going to allow MOT test stations to determine what powertrains they want to accept? So if you're in the middle of a ULEZ and perhaps not seeing so many diesel vehicles, could you be an EV only test station? And on the flip side of that coin, in a more rural area, could you say that you're only testing internal combustion engine vehicles, and at this stage not onboarding with testing this technology until you felt confident?
So I think on the basic principles, sorry, I kind of think we absolutely need to be open to that. I think, I just typed an answer in the chat on the Q&A chat on a sort of slightly different question, but I guess it comes to the same answer about thinking about investment and some of the technologies that might be needed to test different things. And I think as has been the case in the past, when we first tested vehicles with catalytic converters and required different kit for that, so you ended up with a smaller number of garages that tested that, as we have had with diesel vehicles and petrol vehicles. I think it seems reasonable to me that could and should be allowable in the future. I think we need to be careful in how we do it. So we need to make sure that we don't, for example, create a different type of test for modern diesel engines, but there's only 3 places in the country that can do it, because that wouldn't be very helpful if you live in Cornwall and have to drive to Birmingham. But as long as we're kind of reflective on that, and probably more from the way that you suggest, Hayley, of actually, if I want to open a new garage and I only want to do thing X because it's what the lion's share of my customer base is, why would I need to invest in all that other stuff? And that seems reasonable to me. We need to kind of think through that from a consumer point of view to make it understandable, but absolutely, I can't see why we wouldn't want to do that in the future.
There's also a standards viewpoint. I'm ex-military, and we used to have a thing called trade fade. So if 80% of your work was doing one thing, if you then had a presentation, and I believe this was part of the rationale behind dropping classic cars as part of the MOT test inspection. It's, if you're not familiar with the technology and then you're faced with a presentation, that could be quite a standards quandary if that tester isn't familiar with older diesel technology and how to test it.
Yes, I completely agree. Actually. And actually, on something kind of different, and I mentioned in my spiel earlier, you know, it's one of the reasons why actually we narrowed what our examiners do to say, actually, rather than be dealing with commercial vehicle enforcement and MOT, we want you to focus on MOT, and it's have a separate team focus on commercial vehicle enforcement, because it avoids that issue. If you do less things, as long as you keep enough variety in people's jobs to keep engagement, keep interest, then you're right. If you do many things, the chances are you will do many things less well than you might. So I kind of agree. Just picking up, actually, and I was again furiously typing in the chat, someone's kind of put the counter view of that is confusing for the public, and I also agree, and I'm not trying to just agree with everyone, but I suppose it just proves the point that, you know, every argument has at least two perspectives, potentially more perspectives. So is it Jim in the chat has put, you know, we need to make sure that if we were to have, let's say, EV only garages, that it is nice and obvious. We haven't got motorists booking themselves in for an MOT, dropping their car off, and then getting told that they can't test it because it's got a diesel engine. You know, it needs to be nice and easy, nice and simple. So if we were to have multiple tiers, as I say, we've had this in the past, has worked reasonably successfully in the past, so it can work. We wouldn't want tens of different tiers, would we? We would want a small number. But, you know, we already have tiers to some extent, don't we? You can't take a big van everywhere. You can't take a motorbike everywhere. So, you know, we have some categorization within MOT already.
With new owners, class 4 motorhomes with brand new camper van owners, not understanding that they can't put this big boxy vehicle on your tiny ramp. So although it is a class 4, you need a bigger ramp to pick it up. Always my fun one, living in a coastal town. We used to see them quite frequently. I'm going to throw a contentious issue in about connected equipment, because I'm just living my best life today, throwing all of these things. So connected equipment, I understand how the rollout is within progress and how to get this introduced into MOT stations. Personally, as somebody who hates writing things down on clipboards and then laboriously filling them into screens, I'm quite welcome to it, but I understand that not everybody is a fan. I've got a question about the security aspect of connected equipment. And there's a lot of guidance in place for VTS about where their notice board should be, and viewing areas, and other bits of, there's resources about CPD forms and things like that that are available. As we're bringing this connected technology as an obligation into the VTS, will there be resources to support those operating those businesses as to how they can keep that connected technology secure and safe from the vulnerability of a potential malicious attack to take that equipment offline? The Internet of Things does present quite a few security questions.
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't know whether Simon's got anything to add, but I mean, it sort of sounds like a reasonable challenge, that if, and actually broader than connected equipment, you know, we already require garages to use the internet, or what, off the top of my head, I can't remember, is how much best practice, if nothing else, we promote to garages about security, because it's in all our interest, isn't it? You know, none of us want either you as a garage operator to have your systems hacked into, and we don't want to present the government systems to vulnerability because of something foolish that's happened on a garage operated PC or whatever. So I think it's something we could and should look at again. I'm sure we provide some basic information on best practice, but maybe it is too basic. So if there's more we can do.
There's also the malicious intent aspect. I mean, we at the IMI get to work with organisations like MI5, which is just so much fun, I can't tell you. You do come out of it wanting to wear a tinfoil hat and then never leaving your house again. But they are fantastic and fascinating conversations that we get to have. And when we look at how MOT is linked to the vehicle road fund license, this important revenue stream into government, a malicious attack at a national level that could take MOT testing offline by just finding a vulnerable point for, say, roller brake testing. You could bring all of your testing stations to a standstill at the same time, which you've got activity from people like Stop Oil activists as well as terrorist threat to consider. Is this something that's on our radar, and should we be more open about discussing it?
Yeah, well, and I suppose I'm sort of furiously not disagreeing, really. I think if there is more we can do to help guide, then we should. And I suppose it's conversations like this that help prod us a little bit. Just as a thought, and I'm not meaning to dig myself a hole here, but it's perhaps changing tack slightly, Hayley. I have typed quite a few already in the chat, particularly around fees, and I just wonder if it's worth us spending
I think definitely, yeah. I'm
5
going
or 10 minutes on that before we
Yeah,
close. And I
I'm
was
going to finish my
thinking
rabbit hole questions, and yeah, we should.
Shall I just start with kind of my perception? And apologies if it does sound like I'm repeating what I've said before. I get that something might need to change here. I think we need to form a view of what we want the future to look like a bit better, a bit firmer in the next few years, and that will inevitably require some investment. And we then need to find a path of presenting the options, which eventually means presenting options up to ministers as to how that investment gets covered. Now, at one extreme of that could be, well, this isn't necessarily my opinion. It is a viewpoint that could exist, though. One viewpoint is, well, actually, the current maximum fee is, whatever it is, £55. The average fee might be £40. Therefore, why do we need to change £55? So that is one view that is out there. The other extreme could be, we need to change the 55. And then there are a whole load of other options. One option could be, well, let's get rid of the cap. Other options could be, and people have put all sorts of suggestions in the chat of, we could have a minimum fee and a maximum fee. There are a whole load of options there. And I think the reality is we'll need to make sure that those options are understood and find a path through it. I think the argument about discounting is a difficult one. I think it has in the past undermined attempts by the industry to get the fee cap increased, being completely open. I think that's, the levels of discounting have made that a hard argument to present. However, I do get that kind of behind that is there's some behaviours that get hidden, aren't there? That does lead to that kind of race to the bottom of, just because there is substantial discounting doesn't mean that's always done well. It doesn't mean that quality is always the forefront of what people are doing when they're doing MOT, if they are trying to do it on the cheap, or if they are trying to do it as a loss leader for selling further services. So, my gut feel is the current model probably does need to change from where it is now. I think we all need to recognise as an industry that that can be a hard sell for politicians. That can be a hard sell for government to do something that is seen to cost the many millions of motorists more money. So I think kind of understanding both sides of the argument is how we have to approach these things. If you don't understand both sides of the argument, you probably don't win. So I think kind of understanding those constraints will help us find a path through here. But I absolutely do understand it. I think that certainly what I envisage for an MOT of the future at delivering better value to the public, not just in terms of road safety and air quality, but other things such as vehicle crime, is an MOT that will require investment. It will build on the things we already do well to mean that we can do things better as an industry, and that will need investment in training, investment in equipment. So Yeah, I understand. I don't know whether anyone's got anything else to add to that, but
Yeah,
as with everything,
somewhat,
you need to understand both sides of the argument.
somewhat stolen my thunder again.
Oh,
I think
excellent.
I think it's worth saying, even just from the DFT side, we're well aware that the fee hasn't changed in a long time. Probably the number one issue that we get correspondence on, certainly from garages and testers. So we know that if we're going to be asking people to invest significant amounts of money in the process of updating the MOT, that might well be a very difficult thing for garages to do, and it may well impact on the profitability and the breadth of garages that we currently have, with sort of 23,500 or so that we have currently. And that's something that we'll clearly lay out to ministers when we reach that point, and we're having to present those arguments about what the payoffs are for different things that we could be asking you to invest in. So we're definitely aware of that, and I really want people to know that we're not deaf to it. Equally, as Neil said, this does come in the context of it being a political decision, and I think it probably is worth being aware that at least this year, obviously, we are almost certainly going to have an election, and that might affect some of the decision making. And actually, if it needs to change, it probably is more likely to happen in conjunction with the updates to the MOT that we've been discussing, and the ability to justify making those mandatory. But yeah, basically a lot of it I think is really covered by what Neil has said there. I guess the other thing maybe to point out, actually, another thing that did cross my mind, is whether we need to consider those garages that are just doing MOT tests, and whether that affects whether the maximum fee has a bigger impact on them, because I think there is at least some degree of an assumption that a lot of garages which are doing servicing and repairs at the same time as MOTs are going to be thinking about the amount they charge for the MOT within the context of how much they're charging for servicing and repairs, and vice versa. And it's, there's potentially a degree of sort of moving around costs there.
So it's a good point, Matt, actually, and I can hear Ian hurrahing already in the background. There may be others on the call as well, but I certainly know that Ian's there, and is one of those relatively small number of garages that does exactly that model you described, Matt, of MOT only. So you're right. The kind of the business model is different in those cases, isn't it? And
again, it's just as you say, a lot of it is the political context of this, and if it needs to change, us being able to make the best case possible for why that is, and what the evidence is for that.
We're still doing really well for time. We've still got 13 minutes left before 4 o'clock.
I can see we've got 71 questions, but I think a lot of them have been sort of covered off during the discussion. I mean, there is one from an anonymous participant, putting all new technology to one side for a moment, and any investment and payment that would need to support that. Everything has gone up in the last 14 years: wages, rent, rates, utilities, new equipment, etc. So why has the test fee remained the same for that last 14 years? Yes, I understand the cost of term living crisis. That has only been a term for the last year or so. So putting that into context, £54 back in 2010 would now be 88 today. So in real term, a reduction of 34. I do love some number crunches, so thank you for that. So the relevant part of the question, I think, for me, is question to the IMI: what are we doing about it? So I think we need to sort of take some ownership of that, because although we've discussed the test fee from the viewpoint of those representing the departments, we haven't answered what we, the IMI, are doing about it. So what we have done already is our response to the MOT consultation and call for evidence. The test fee was something that was within that response to government, and we do look to our members to ask what their feelings are on this subject. It may surprise you to learn that this was an area that lots of people gave us information about, and then we passed that on. We do also champion the industry to not just the DVSA, but also to government. I'm sure Neil and Simon will tell you how often I do phone and email about various issues, anything from seatbelts to consultations to anything else that just floats into my inbox. I do robustly support that and make sure it gets to the right people. I think DVSA have covered off within their answers about what they're doing about the test fee. But also with the cost of living crisis, the other thing that the IMI is doing, where we can't have a direct impact on something like the MOT test fee right here, right now, there are other areas that we can have a direct impact on that could ease that financial burden. And I'm sure Julian will be able to pop in towards the end of this presentation of all of those areas where we do save our members money. And the membership fee for the Institute, you can recoup very quickly and more in the benefits that you can access as a member. This cost of living crisis is impacting everybody. And I want to make sure that everybody is aware of all of those cost savings that are on offer with membership from the Institute. We are a not-for-profit organisation and we are here for you. And I understand how difficult it is during this crisis. Any other areas that you can save some money, we want to help you with.
Fantastic.
I think the only other thing actually I'd add on that, and I mean, I suspect we have in the past talked about fees all day, and we could again, and in many ways that, you know, it isn't directly in the control of anyone here. It's perhaps just an observation. It unfortunately becomes treated like a lot of other, you know, things in government, and it can be kind of considered as effectively a tax. And I know it isn't a tax. I know the effect it has on garage businesses, but that can be how it is perceived. So it's something that can be controlled, you know, and similar, not that I'm looking for sympathy, similar has happened within, you know, HGV, PSV testing, for example, around, you know, fees not having increased in similar kind of time period. So I think we're all in many ways furiously agreeing that, you know, we need to find a path through that, because it is not necessarily the sustainable model we want.
There's one other point that Neil Pattermore raises. Neil is involved with the Independent Automotive Aftermarket Federation, and he has stated within the chat there is an education needed to vehicle owners. So I think this is definitely something that we could all work together on, everybody on this call, many of whom do not understand the complexity of their vehicles, and they better understand why a test is so important. And equally, the fee needs to reflect the time and investment given the increasing hourly rates in vehicle repairs, when an MOT is increasingly too cheap in real terms. So again, it is a question that's centered around MOT fees, but I feel what Neil highlights here is that important educational aspect to motorists about the complex machine that they are operating and responsible for. I think to build, not to put words in Neil's mouth, but to build on what he's saying, an understanding of what roadworthiness is. I mean, we found that quite prevalent. Tesla being the worst offender for presenting first MOT with tyres on cords, which was a bit amusing because I've also heard that Teslas are so complex and clever that they communicate everything to the motorist about what could possibly be wrong with them, but they haven't quite sort of worked out how to communicate tyre tread depth just yet. I do see.
Yeah, so I think it's exactly a good point. Actually, I think this may be too strong a term, but there's a risk that some modern cars could be missold, couldn't they? Yeah, this car is amazing. If there is anything wrong with it, a big red light will come on. Therefore, you do not need to worry about anything. And if that's what you believe as a motorist, that's really worrying, isn't it? Because as you say, your tyre tread might be out, brake pads might be worn. There may be all sorts of things that there aren't sensors sensing. So I think consumer education is part of it, also being alert to any of that mis-selling. We're doing a separate bit of DVSA. We have our market surveillance unit that does exactly pick up on that kind of issue of where there might be mis-selling. So agree, but I think, you know, it is just a perception. People are used to things feeling smooth, modern, sophisticated, so they think it does it about everything and forget that beneath the skin there's something actually pretty basic and mechanical, the same as any other vehicle. So yeah, I think it's a really good point. And actually, we haven't talked much about motorists in this conversation, but you know, motorist education, motorist compliance, motorists looking after their car all year, they're all really important parts of the future of MOT, as well as, you know, the kind of garage perspective, let's call it that.
And it's worth saying as well, there was a question in the consultation, you know, when there was the consideration of changing the date of the first test, whether part of compensating for any of the perceived road safety impacts of that would be for us to take a more active role in promoting awareness to motorists of what they can do and what their responsibilities are in keeping their car roadworthy, because you know, they have a flat out obligation to be driving a roadworthy vehicle, and particularly on the tyres point. I think that is one where we have had some discussions about whether we can raise awareness on people's ability to do that testing themselves. And I think the department did have or has considered at least recently a advertising campaign on that one. So there is definitely some consideration of that and what our role is in promoting awareness, because it is very important.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Before we end with the closing slide and the closing remarks from the panel and myself, I'd just like to launch a poll, if possible. If you can give me 1 second, we'd love to hear from you. Which options best describe your job? So whether you're a training provider, MOT tester, mechanic technician, test station owner, admin staff, or manufacturer. We'd really like to hear before we go on to closing remarks. That'd be fantastic.
This submission is anonymous. It is just to try and develop what our engagements are going to look like in the future.
And while we're just completing that, do we have one sentence, one thing that we're going to take from this meeting? Should we start with Neil, and then we'll go down the panel? Neil, one thing you're going to take?
Yeah, I think I mean the useful thing from my perspective, in truth, and although you might not always feel it, is it's particularly looking at the typed questions, and you know, we won't have digested them all on the call. I think what I find myself doing, weirdly enough, is agreeing with most people actually, and what we need to do is work out how we wrap that up into the future, which isn't to say everyone will get exactly what they've suggested, but we need to find a path through that. We need to get the test modernized. I think we all agree in that, but there's a load of boring practicalities we also need to sort out to make this work. So really helpful from my perspective.
Brilliant. Simon, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Well, I'm the same. Yeah, there's a lot of comments in there that people think we should take forward the rest of it, but the challenge is moving forward with the new technologies, and we need engagement from people. Please get involved with us.
100%. The more you put in, the more you'll get out. We've managed to successfully answer 45 questions here on this poll alone, so it's been fantastic. And thank you for completing the poll. So it seems like the biggest people that are here are training providers, followed by test station owners, MOT testers, admin staff, mechanics, and a manufacturer as well. That's great news. Matthew, did you have anything you wanted to share?
Yeah, I think similar to what Neil and Simon have said, there's a lot of questions in the chat, which is really good to see. You know, we want to get as much feedback as possible, and you can tell from the amount of responses we got to the consultation that there is a lot of people engaged with this, and we recognize that there's a lot, not just technically that's going on, but there's a lot with the bigger picture as well that we need to take time to properly consider. I think a couple of the more specific things that were maybe interesting to me were some of the thoughts on EV training, and whether, you know, we need to think about making that mandatory, and just some of the thoughts about how changes we can make to what's mandatory and what is in the regulations affect the commercial models of garages and the practicalities of implementing that stuff. So yeah, I think those are probably the main things in my mind at the second.
Thank you, Matthew. And then Hayley, did you have a sentence you wanted to share?
I'll never pass on the opportunity to say something. Your institute, your voice. If you enjoyed the session today, and this is the first time that you've engaged with us here at the Institute, do take a look at the website, see what else that we do, have a look at our platforms, our social media outlets, and please engage with us again at other opportunities when we are collating the voice of the industry in order to get it to policymakers and decision makers.
Fantastic, Hayley. And for myself, as Hayley mentioned earlier, being a member of the Institute of the Motor Industry brings so many discounts to support you during the cost of living crisis. Our members save up to £400 on things like going to the cinema, on discounted CPD. There's a free legal helpline. There's so many advantages to being an IMI member, including the professional register, where you can really showcase your professionalism to the members of the public. And the last thing I wanted to share was we get this feedback from the DVSA every month. So you can see from the 22nd of February, there were still 29,000 testers who had yet to carry out their assessment. That's around 50% of the testers. So please don't leave it till 5 to 12, as Simon mentioned, because we do have a few testers that have done that previously. Please try and do it as soon as possible so that you can pass and just carry on being the amazing testers that you are. Well, thank you so much for sharing and sharing your time with us today. We really do appreciate it. And thank you so much to the panel. We really appreciate the panel taking the time to share their feedback and their thoughts and their knowledge and wisdom with us and with the testers. We will be sharing a recording of this presentation to everyone who attended, and any questions that we don't answer, we'll try and get those to you as well. Brilliant. That remains for me to just say thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you. Big thank you to the panel. Thank you to everyone.
No, thank you all. Thank you for the IMI for pulling everyone together. It's really helpful. So good work all. So thank you.
Brilliant. All right then, everyone. Take care now.
Thank you, everybody. Have
Thanks
a good day.
all.